Today, we're getting into what makes a great lease, when to negotiate, and how to set yourself up for flexibility down the road. Welcome to Dental Talk and welcome to 2026. We have got a great lineup of conversations coming this year, and we're kicking things off with a topic that affects every single practice owner: real estate. Ryan McArthur leads real estate at Dental Corp. He comes from a commercial leasing background, including retail, and has negotiated hundreds of lease assignments. Adam Levene is a Winnipeg-based corporate lawyer specializing in dental mergers and acquisitions. Ryan, Adam, great to have you both on Dental Talk. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So a question for Adam. We'll get this started right now. A lease is crucial for a dental practice because obviously they can't operate without one. But walk us through some of the key reasons that a well-structured lease is so important for a dentist.
Three key points to consider to start with is your lease controls your financial future, your ability to sell your practice, and the security of your assets. Without a solid lease, you're putting the financial performance of your clinic at risk. You want to be able to control how rents are adjusted, where your practice is located, and allows you to extract maximum value when selling the clinic in the future. You want to build into your lease transfer flexibility. So when you sell your clinic, you retire. You want to be able to maintain the value you built and the goodwill of your practice. So you want to make sure your lease contains the appropriate provisions to allow you to make that transfer. You're also going to spend a ton of money building out your space, but you're doing that in a property that someone else controls. So you want to make sure you have adequate protections to ensure that you can stay in the space for an appropriate amount of time to protect the amount you've invested in the practice.
Interesting. Ryan, does that match what you're seeing on your end?
Yeah, for sure. I think the one point that Adam just made that I'd hammer home is that asset security. Keep in mind that this is probably the biggest financial decision that a dentist is going to make in their career, and investment. A 6-op clinic, just as an example, could cost you upwards of $1.5 million, and so it's a substantial outlay that these dentists are making. And so I think ensuring that you have a lease that's well structured is super important. There's a couple things I'd layer in. I think one thing that's, to keep in mind and why a lease that's well structured is so important is for patient care. It's, I know this is, more of a business discussion, but if, you have a lease with egregious terms that give landlords rights to, kick you out within a certain time frame, you could be putting that patient care at risk, right? Gary, about this. If you're trying to transfer a patient mid-treatment, it's going to be, a lot more work for the patient. It could come with complications. I don't know if you have any insight there that you could add from a clinical perspective, but, I know it's not ideal if you had to switch locations or move a patient mid treatment.
No, of course, for sure. I mean, you may get attrition. Patient may not want to move with you, and you've lost that patient and perhaps their whole family. So you want a seamless transition wherever possible, or no transition at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So Ryan, you've been involved in just a countless amount of transactions for dental practices, and you've experienced the do's and the don'ts of leasing. Any recommendations for our listeners regarding the key terms to pay attention to, and more importantly, the pitfalls that they need to avoid?
Term is a big one. When I say term, I mean term inclusive of renewal options. You want to give yourself as much leeway as possible, not knowing what the future is going to hold. And you also want to control that lease and that space for as long as you can. There's a lot of value tied in the assets. There's a lot of value tied in the goodwill of that location. Patients are habitual. They want to go to the same place. And so making sure you have that runway is super important. Rent is obviously a big one. The better you can do from that perspective, financially, you're going to be better off. It's also going to help in the long run when you go to sell that clinic. That's going to be taken into consideration when you're looking at the valuation. And so, rent's an obvious one. Exclusivity is another big one that we've seen that's a miss in some leases. If you're in a retail site specifically where you're paying a premium to be at that site, you want to make sure you're the only dentist there. It could be very detrimental to have someone come in and do the same business.
Exclusivity also, people forget often to cover specialty dental practices. So often you'll see a restriction in leases that are limited to general dental practice, but To give yourself maximum flexibility, you want to cover any specialty you're going to include as well. So very important.
Yeah, especially if, the offices are going to have insourcing, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good call out, Adam. Yeah, you want, and it's another reason to have a good broker and legal team that you're working with to make sure that they understand your business and what you should be looking for in the use clause and in that exclusivity clause. Another big one is the transfer provisions. That gets overlooked quite a bit, but again, this gives you flexibility down the road as you're thinking about retiring or transitioning the practice to a new owner. You want to make sure that that's as seamless a process as possible. Otherwise, it extracts value from your practice and, could put a potential sale at risk.
Deals that we work on, often the biggest sticking point is transfer of a lease. And so nothing imperils your value in your practice more than your lease, which is because it's in the hands of a third party. So getting ahead of those points earlier on before you're actually getting ready to sell is critical.
Yeah, and on that point, Adam, just quickly, I'll segue a little bit here, but everyone, you know, you can have a lease that you think is great under the current landlord. You may have a great relationship with them. You may know them personally, but you got to think worst case scenario here and set this lease up for, any future owner that may take over that property. I think a lot of people will not think about that, but you have to think, there could be someone that comes in down the road and wants to redevelop the property or wants, has a different purpose for it. So you want to set yourself up for that situation. Just a few more things that come top of mind. Another big clause to think about are redevelopment and demolition clauses. Another big sticking point with landlords, but this is probably more prevalent in urban type locations where landlords would like to redevelop their properties if they can, and they like to keep that flexibility. And so what that clause gives them is the right to terminate on a certain number of months' notice. And so, as you can imagine, that would be quite detrimental to you if you found out, you had to be out of the property in 6 months because they wanted to redevelop the site. So that's a big one to look out for.
Ryan, if demolition clause, what are the most common things that you're looking for when, to avoid that pitfall or that problem?
Yeah, so it's basically a clause that they would insert, and so you want to make sure that if they do insert it, first of all, the first position should be to push back on that. Again, that all that term that you have is almost invalid if they have that clause in there, right? It gives them the ability to terminate at any time. So that's what you need to look out for. If you're in a situation where it's like the deal's not getting done unless they can add this clause in there, really get comfortable with what's happening with that site, what the future state of that site could look like. Is it ripe to be residential in the future? Are there active developments, applications open with the city? Ideally, you don't accept it in the first place, but again, if you had to in certain situations, you'd want to try and limit when it comes into effect, how many months notice you get, what compensation might look like if it does come into effect. Are they going to reimburse you for some of the costs you outlaid to build that clinic? Those are just a few things, but ideally in a perfect world, you're trying to avoid that clause as much as you can because it does give the landlord a lot of flexibility to do what they want with the site at potentially your expense.
So from a legal standpoint, Adam, of all those clauses, because a lot of clauses you really need to look out for, which clauses do you find yourself negotiating the hardest?
Dentists are sought after tenants. That is a big advantage when you're negotiating on behalf of the dentist who's the tenant. So I think we should always remember that. We'll talk about the ideal times to do that a little bit later. So key points that I would always focus on from a legal standpoint is dealing with exclusivity and the demolition relocation clauses. Ryan gave some practical points about what to look at. But then we've got to make it sure that it's tight enough that makes it clear that if something happens, that we're compensated properly for the cost of being relocated or demolition, and two, that they understand the ramifications of it. So we'll spend a lot of time discussing that.
And if you could pick one clause that's the hardest to negotiate, which one would that be?
Well, have you got a tenant that is very anxious, sorry, a landlord that is very anxious to have the ability to redevelop? It's the demolition redevelopment clause.
Right.
So we would negotiate hard on that. And ultimately, generally with some success, because I said dentists are sought after tenants, but that is also a big indicia. And you can't get that removed. You may want to reconsider that site.
Now that we've dug into the specifics of the lease, can you walk us through how and when a dentist should be negotiating these terms?
Sure, absolutely. So first and foremost, you want to be working with someone who knows this area. So a broker, lawyer, that broker and a lawyer that or understand dental leasing in particular, I think is critically important. Dental is a business that's different than other businesses. So items like relocation, goodwill, that relate to other businesses are very particular with dental. So you want to make sure you have someone that understands dental practices and their natural succession over periods of your career. Generally, if you wait till right before the renewal of your term, you have no ability to renegotiate anything. But if you get started a couple years in advance, you have more leverage than you would have otherwise. You can ask for money to improve your premises, maybe the removal clauses that you didn't like the first time around, whether that's personal guarantees or whether that's relocation clauses or demolition clauses you didn't agree with. So every day that goes by over your term, your leverage dwindles. You at that point, you may also want to talk with your landlord, practice succession. But certainly you want to do that in advance of any major transition. So you want to, let's say you're thinking about selling your business to a dental corp or to another dentist. You would want to start that discussion very early on to set the table for it. We're seeing a lot now of dentists going to their landlords very early on and saying, I want to maybe sell my practice 24 months from now. I need these clauses. I need additional term. I need the ability to assign to a company like Dental Corp built into my lease, and other terms which someone like Ryan can highlight and would be important to a purchaser, or a broker or a lawyer like me. If we can identify the purchaser and get those in there long before, that gives you certainty of closing and certainty of value.
So Ryan, do you wish dentists had started these conversations sooner? And when do you wish these dentists had started these conversations?
As soon as you insert the idea of an assignment or a buyer into the equation, landlords see dollar signs. They see, okay, let's ask for changes, and they also understand that the seller or the dentist wants to get this transaction through. And so your leverage is ultimately at an all-time low at that stage. And so, anything that they can do to have those conversations well in advance, ideally at the beginning stages of the leases or, when a renewal is coming up, when there is some leverage. But I would certainly say in advance of selling or thinking about selling, that should be one of the initial calls that the dentist makes.
When a dentist partners with a network like Dental Corp, what actually changes? What does your team handle that they used to manage alone?
The whole value that we add is taking all of those business functions off of their plate, and one of those is obviously real estate. So we oversee all real estate functions here at Dental Corp, including leasing, which we're talking about today. But it's also, the landlord relationship piece, making sure that things at the property are going the way they should be, and leveraging those relationships that we have with those landlords if things are going sideways. We also provide support with all of the rent. We do rent audits as well to keep landlords honest. And so we do find savings that way to help the P&Ls. We also support on the construction and maintenance side, which is a huge value add for the clinics. To not have to, stick handle an entire relocation if that ever came into effect, or a practice expansion, or a significant renovation to the clinic is a huge value add for the practices and allows them to focus on the clinical. And then the ongoing daily maintenance needs, the HVAC unit goes down, there's an issue with the plumbing, the electrical, we can have people in there and stick handle that whole side of things for you, which, the idea is to make it as seamless and as easy as possible post joining the network.
Yeah, and from personal experience, you certainly do that. I mean, it's a great advantage being part of the network. Adam, from a legal perspective, what differences do you notice in how landlords respond to independent dentists versus those with network support?
Yeah, so there's a significant difference in expertise and B in leverage. So network supports so dental corp owns approximately 600 practices. So their covenant and knowledge of different landlords and ability to exert leverage given the number of locations they control is significant versus an individual dentist or dentist with maybe a couple locations. While they're important to the landlord, they don't have the same significance as what could be one of their more significant tenants in the properties. So it's certainly a significant advantage, both in expertise that someone like Ryan can offer, but also just a leverage with landlords and able to extract some of the things we talked about. I've shared with Ryan many times. I'm amazed what we're able to negotiate and we're acting for the Ryan's company, Dental Corp.
And you probably touched on this as well, but let's take a deeper dive into it if we can. If a dentist is 5 to 10 years out from wanting to transition, what should they be doing now? And what's different for someone just starting out?
Yeah, so someone that's starting out, probably doesn't want to spend a lot of time with brokers, lawyers, accountants to discuss anything. They're anxious to get something built and they want to get a whole bunch of money from the landlord to build out their practice. And so that's almost always the focus. And things like exclusivities and relocation clauses and assignment clauses, they seem so far away because you're just starting out your practice. Sale to a network seems remote as well. While I think you should consider all of these things at the initial stage, the reality is many people don't because they don't want to spend the time or money or it just doesn't fit their interest areas. And, negotiating any agreement is a balancing act. You can't have everything always. So generally maximum tenant improvement allowances, meaning the landlord gives you a whole bunch of money to build out your space is desired when you're starting out. Quite apart from that, when you're getting closer to transition, you want to build in on a lot of the things we've talked about already. Update exclusivities to make sure you've covered off those specialty areas or anything that may be important to a purchaser. You want to make sure you have significant term left on your lease. So term plus any renewal period. That will increase the value in your practice significantly because any purchaser is going to look and say, "Oh, you only have 5 years left on your lease. What happens if the landlord doesn't renew?" Then the value shrinks to almost zero because they may not be able to force them to renew. And as Ryan suggested, you have to go to the landlord at that point. They said, "Well, we'll give you a 5-year renewal term or a 10-year renewal term, but we got to charge you $3, $4, $5 more a foot," which of course reduces the value of your practice. So you want to make sure that you increase your term to a sufficient level, preferably 20 years, but minimum 10, that allows you to be ready for sale. You probably want to control how your rent adjusts. Landlords are often prepared to agree to rental step-ups at a time that may be indeed much lower than when you actually renew. So that allows you to control your costs and gives you certainty that will add value to your practices. Then a purchaser will know exactly what they're paying for a number of years. You want to be released of your personal covenant on a sale. So often when a lease is entered to initially, you may have a dental corporation, but you also have yourself personally on the lease. You want to make sure that on sale of your practice or retirement, that you're going to be released personally from the lease as well as your dental corp.
And Ryan, what do you see from dentists who are well planned versus those who really didn't plan at all or didn't plan enough?
Yeah, so what I would see from them is I would see a much smoother transaction whenever they do decide to transact, having obviously lived through that myself. Typically, if it's been planned ahead of time, the lease has been set up in a way that transaction is going to happen a lot smoother with the landlord, and so it becomes a much more seamless, less stressful situation for them, especially because they have other documents that are being finalized in tandem. The lease is one of quite a few that they're finalizing for a sale of their business. So that's one thing. I think I also see them extracting maximum financial value from their clinic. Because again, if they have a lease that's been set up well in advance and is in a good spot, it makes their business much more attractive to people buying that business and allows them again to extract that maximum value from it when it comes to the purchase price.
Yeah, it makes totally sense. Adam, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that is very core. A lease controls the value of your practice. So taking great care and dealing with it is early is essential. And it also, to Ryan's point, transactions are very stressful when you're selling your practice. In addition to continuing to operate, you have lawyers and accountants and other advisors coming at you with all sorts of documents. But the lease can be very stressful because it's out of your hands. The other documents typically are in your hands. So getting ahead of that early, separate from the transaction, is very important. And I think the reality is everybody sells ultimately. Either they retire and they sell, or they sell at a different point in their practice. But regardless, it's going to happen. And dentists do have the ability to extract value from their practices. So being ready is really critical.
Mm-hmm.
Different than other businesses, which do wind up, or other professionals, dentists have that ability.
All right, gentlemen, let's finish with a quick lightning round for both of you. Short answers only, no overthinking. Okay, you ready?
Let's do it.
Dentists is signing their first lease tomorrow. What's the one clause they should never overlook?
You're asking a lawyer to limit their words. I'll try my best. Term and renewal clause. Make sure you have maximum term and renewal clause.
Don't miss exercising your options either.
If you could go back and give yourself one piece of leasing advice when you started, what would it be?
It's all about relationships. You can't, especially when you're dealing with 600 plus locations, relationships matter immensely.
And Adam, renewal time is coming up. What's the biggest mistake you see dentists make?
Just exercising the renewal without requesting any changes.
Ryan, Adam, thanks for coming on Dental Talk. Really, really appreciate it. If you take one thing from this session, think about your real estate setup now, not when you're ready to sign, because it'll give you options and flexibility. More to come in 2026. See you next time on Dental Talk.